Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It's Saturday, what is it, June 21st. Looks like we're heading into summer, and we'll see if this is one of a number of summers that will continue on into the future, or if this is the last summer of humanity. I'm calling this the MacKinder Strikes Back, or will the grand chessboard be upended? So I'm going to talk about, of course, the situation that's going on in with Iran, Israel, the United States, and the war drums that are beating. This all, and what's really interesting is you have very intelligent people. I was just listening to Doug McGregor, who says, the average American person, all they care about is where they're going to get their next beer and what's on for what's the next game to watch. They don't really care about any of these issues. On the other hand, there are people like myself who I kind of see myself as being someone in the cave, in Plato's cave, really trying to figure out what's actually going on, and trying to get outside the cave to see what those shadows that we see presented on the TV screen or on the pages of the newspapers or on the computer screen, whatever. What does it all really mean? So, as we all know, just in the last few years, first of all, we had a war develop in Ukraine, and the intent of that war, as the U.S. government, as Lloyd Austin, the former Secretary of Defense, said, was to weaken Russia. And the whole idea of weakening Russia is because Russia is a huge country. It has a lot of resources, and unfortunately, it does not share the ideology of the West, which is to plunder and control everything else in the whole planet, which has basically been the modus operandi of the entire Western civilization for at least the past 500 years. Well, they misunderestimated, to use George Bush. The thing about the West is that as it's gotten more and more successful, it's also gotten stupider and stupider. So at a certain point in the year 2000, you had George W. Bush saying, "I misunderestimated," whatever that means. He underestimated what would happen with the 9/11 attacks. He didn't realize that when he got a memo saying Osama bin Laden destined to attack, that it actually was something he should notice. But that's a whole other story. And parenthetically, I'll just mention that I just saw a video today where you just can't make this stuff up, So because it's Benjamin Netanyahu is probably the greatest leader of the United States since George Washington, in a perverse sort of way, because this video quoted him as saying that in 1995 there was going to have to be a major war to get control of the Middle East, and the only way that could happen is if if the World Trade Center fell. He actually said that. And then the day after, and then I never had seen that before, but it was a video. It actually shows him saying this. And then the day after 9/11, the New York Times reporter says, "What's your opinion of what went on?" And Benjamin Netanyahu says, "It's very good." Well, not good, but it'll create sympathy for Israel. So here we are. That was 2001. Here we are in 2025. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been swearing up and down that Ukraine has been on the verge of creating a nuclear weapon apparently since 1984. In the next 3 months. So 1984 in the next 3 months, 2000 in the next 3 months, 2010 in the next 3 months. Here we are in 2025. Any day now, and we're just going to have to do something about this. Well, so we have this war in Ukraine, and war in Ukraine is not working out the way the United States really wanted it to. So then we have this situation with Israel, and Israel decides out of the blue, and I shouldn't say out of the blue because there was a lot of pressure on Iran to succumb to U.S. Demands, that it get rid of its by its own admission, non-existent nuclear weapons program. So, so they're making impossible and absurd demands on an issue that doesn't even exist. But it's not about the issue of nuclear weapons. The issue is about gaining control of the Asian continent, because the Asian continent is the repository of the vast majority of the world's resources. That is what this is all about. So I say that it's not a war about Israel and poor little Israel, the victim of the evil Iranians or the evil Arabs. What it really is about is using Israel the question is, people say the United States is controlled by Israel, and on the other hand, some people say, Joe Biden said, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to create it. Well, actually, we did create it, because in 1917, of course, Lord Balfour sent a letter to Lord Rothschild. All these lords, says, we really need these lords helping us to decide how the planet's fate is going to be determined. And he said, yeah, we really need to have a homeland for the Jewish people, the poor Jewish people. So Israel was created in 1948, especially partly because of the sympathy that people had for the Jewish people, following the Holocaust, partly because Harry Truman got a large campaign contribution from some wealthy Jewish contributors, and also the Soviet Union at the time saw Israel as being a kind of a socialist bastion, because many of the Jews who founded Israel were socialists, and they had a natural affinity for the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union found out to its chagrin that other factions of the Jewish community had completely other ideas. So, which Albert Einstein actually referred to in his letter to the New York Times, in which he pointed out that the main political actors, you could say, that were taking charge of Israel's political discourse were racists and fascists who committed atrocities and terror attacks. So this is 1948. So anybody who tells me that whatever happened in 2023, happened out of the blue, it's ridiculous. Okay, so we are, and Israel thought that it was going to be able to, create a great real estate opportunity for Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, by taking over Gaza and creating a wonderful resort. It's becoming more complicated and more difficult than they thought it was going to be. But you see, and also Ukraine isn't working out. So the empire is always they're like jostling, looking around. What can we do to screw things up in order to get control and get more money and get, just create more problems for other people, which we will benefit from. So that is essentially what happened after this. And of course, it's my theory. I'm only inside Plato's cave, so you can say whatever you want. But it looks to me like as the campaign in Gaza has stalled, and on the other hand, there have been successes in Syria, so-called successes for the empire, by destroying Syria and practically destroying Lebanon. There was this opening where the main issue here is not about Israel. It's not about the weapons of mass destruction, or about Iran's nuclear weapons, or even Iran's nuclear program at all. What it is about is control of Asia. And there are two key transport corridors where Iran is at the center of these corridors. There's a northwest corridor running from the Russian Federation down south through the Central Asian republics and into Ukraine, and then down to the Indian Ocean. And that what that does is it obviates the need for Russia to go through the Black Sea and through the the Mediterranean and through the Suez Canal in order to get its products out and for products to come back in. So this new transportation corridor, this north-south corridor, means that the Suez Canal is no longer a pivot point. And the other aspect is the east-west corridor, because you see the Strait of Malacca, which is a very small strait in Malaysia, through which a huge amount of traffic, naval traffic, ocean traffic, passes through. If the United States can block that and as a result create an effective blockade of China. So what China is doing is they are creating this east-west corridor, which will pass all the way through by train through Central Asia into Iran and then on into Western Europe and into Russia and all over Asia. But you see, and then there's one other aspect of it, which is that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, which is where something like 20% of the world's oil flows. So, and Iran has said, if you guys don't, mess around with us too much, we'll just shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and you're gonna, your economies are gonna see, drastic rises in oil prices, and everything's going to create a complete mess. So don't mess with us, or we'll create a mess for you. So what they're trying to do, what the Americans are trying to do, using the pretext of Israel, defending Israel and protecting the world from Iran's nuclear weapons, which they've always said they don't want to do. That is the goal, is to get control of Iran, which lies. If you look at a map of all of Asia, from East Asia, that is from like Korea and Tianjin in China, all the way to Western Europe, into Spain and France, and ultimately into England. This is huge landmass, and Iran is a natural pivot point, a natural central point for all of that traffic, both east and west and north and south. And of course, as I mentioned, the Strait of Hormuz. So that is really what this war is about. The United States really wants to disrupt this whole pattern of Asian integration, this whole pattern of the BRICS, which is primarily Asian countries. And the United States really needs to disrupt that in order to maintain this 500-year hegemony that the West has had over the rest of the world. That is what this is about. Okay, so then the next question is, Israel, thought that it would create this kind of knockout blow against Iran early, I guess, on June 13th. So they had very good intelligence, and they assassinated a number of very important leaders of Iran, military and military leaders and nuclear scientists, and they hoped to basically destabilize Iran to such an extent that it would essentially fall apart. So, but it turns out that Iran was far more resilient than they had expected. So as a result, after experiencing this initial shock from Israel, Iran started fighting back, and now Israel itself has suffered extreme losses. So from what I'm hearing, the Houthis had wiped out Israel's southern port of Eilat, and Iran has wiped out the main northern port of Haifa, and that leaves one more port, I think it's Ashdod, but which doesn't have the capacity that these other two ports had. So Israel is in effect under a partial blockade. One of the issues that I've been wondering about is that I hear a lot of transport planes flying into Israel. And we know that Ben Gurion Airport, which is a civilian airport, is pretty much shut down. And we also hear that there are very difficult if not impossible, to get flights out of Israel or into Israel if you're a civilian. And the Israeli government, as I've noted, is telling its citizens that you can't even get out, even if you want to get out. So they basically created Israel as a prison for its whole population. And while it's true that some countries, China, Russia, and other countries are trying to get their nationals, their citizens out of Israel, it's not easy. But so the question is, what is going to happen next? As I say, there are very, very intelligent people who have a lot of military experience and journalistic experience and academic experience who talk about these things. And you could say, well, they're smart, so they must know, except that they don't agree. So I'm here in the middle listening to all these people and trying to make sense of it. So that's what I'm doing for you. So on the one hand, you have people like John Mearsheimer, who's been the head of the realist school of diplomacy, of statecraft in the United States, saying it would be crazy for the United States to attack Iran, because Iran is a much more powerful country than Syria is, of course, or even Yemen, which seems to have kind of beaten off attacks by the United States Navy against it. So if we can't defeat Yemen, how are we going to defeat a country like Iran? And on the other hand, I was reading a post by Seymour Hersh, and he's an extremely well-placed journalist. He's been around for, I don't know, maybe 50 years or something. And what he says is that they are definitely planning an attack, and they have enormous resources. They're moving, and this is just a matter of open source. Aircraft carriers, strategic bombers, all these kinds of military assets that are being moved into position for a massive attack on Iran. And one person pointed out that Trump had also sent an aircraft carrier to North Korea and had made all kinds of threats, like Donald Trump has done. He says, you must surrender unconditionally. Well, wait a second. We haven't even declared war on Iran. And I actually just wrote a letter to my congressman in California, and I said, I think, on the one hand, I seem to recall in World War II, Japan and Germany had to sign unconditional surrender terms. However, there was a state of war that was going on between the United States and Germany and the United States and Japan. And those were actual congressional resolutions that said, yes, we declare war on Japan and Germany, but we have not declared war. All we've done is issued threats to Iran. So, and engaged in lots of psychological manipulation. Yeah, sign up for this treaty and everything will be fine, and we'll get rid of the sanctions and it'll be great. And next thing, we're going to crush you, and people in Tehran, you better leave the city. So how are 10 to 15 million people going to leave a city, in a day? So there's a lot of psychological manipulation going on. So and anybody who thinks that the manipulation is going on against just Iran, well, guess what? It's going on against us. We are being massively psyoped on a continual basis. That's what the media is. That's their purpose, is to hypnotize and psyop us with their much of it is lies or distortions or whatever it is. Okay, so we don't really know what is going to happen. It could be that Trump will stage a sort of a peremptory attack, drop a few bombs, say, okay, we got him, and now it's done. And so that would be the easy way out. On the other hand, he may decide to just suddenly declare that there's been a breakthrough in in the negotiations, and there's no need to attack Iran at all. And then the third possibility, which is what Seymour Hersh is saying and what Douglas McGregor has been saying, is that no, they're really going to go for the throat. They really need to get Iran and its government out of there. They need a West-friendly government to come back into power. And of course, there have been reports, we're seeing pictures of the son of the Shah, and he says, I'm going to come back and it's all going to be great. And any Iranian who knows what went on between 1953, after the United States overthrew the democratically elected government, and 1979, when the United States, with a CIA and MI6 coup, overthrew that democratically elected government and installed the Shah with his Savak, terror organization, which was terrorizing anybody who opposed this completely, puppet regime of the West. This is what can I say? The Iranian people are really going to accept this guy back with open arms, and yet they're trotting this guy out. It's ridiculous. Okay, so I've talked about so the question is whether Israel is the master or the pawn here, and what I would like to say is that the relationship with Israel and the West is it's basically a dysfunctional, mutually abusive marriage, where both partners need each other and try to control each other. And the question is, who is controlling whom and who is using whom? People go back and forth about this issue. But for me, I don't really think it's not really relevant. The reality is that Israel is acting in a way that furthers the hegemonic impulses of the U.S. empire, the Western empire. So we can say, oh, they dragged us into the war. Well, no. The larger picture here is the MacKinder picture, or the Brzezinski picture. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote this book called The Grand Chessboard, and the Grand Chessboard is Asia, and who is going to control Asia controls the world. So this is a theme that's been going through the Western discussion for literally at least a couple of hundred years, and de facto for 500 years. So the issue of whether Israel is a pawn or a puppet master is not relevant to me. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, now another aspect of this is Iran's resources, because it's not only is it from a transportation corridor point of view, but also the West has a continual problem. It's a crisis of debt, and the U.S. government's debt is now approaching $37 trillion. It was $35 trillion a few months ago. It's now up to almost $37 trillion. And all of that needs to be collateralized. Otherwise, the whole deck of cards will just collapse because of this crazy over-leveraging of debt in the economy. And the way they've done that is, first they thought, we'll go into Ukraine because Ukraine has, as Lindsey Graham said, it has $12 trillion of minerals that we want to get our hands on, and we can't allow Russia to get their hands on them. So there is that aspect of it. And if we can, and I call that's just the appetizer, because if the U.S. had been able to get control of Ukraine, then it would have weakened Russia, had basically a dagger in the heart of Russia, because Ukraine is it shares such a long border with the Russian Federation, and if you place nuclear missiles inside of Ukraine, they're 5 or 10 minutes from Moscow, puts tremendous pressure on Moscow, and then using Georgia and creating coups in the Baltic countries and Poland, they basically created lots of enemies against the Russian Federation. And the whole idea of that is to bring down the Russian Federation, break it up, and get control of its resources. So the Ukraine project has failed. Russia's going to win. It's economically stronger than they ever could have expected. So that's failed. And they wanted Russia's resources, and that's failed. So what is next on the as a possibility to replenish the collateral for the Western banking system? And Iran happens to have a huge amount of both minerals and especially oil and gas. So that's another reason why the United States and the British and the West really needs to get hold of get control of Iran. So that's another aspect of it. So now the question that I have is, what are the consequences for this whole adventure? The positive, what they thought would happen is that Israel would stage this attack. This is the optimal scenario from their point of view. They hoped that Israel would attack Iran. They would decapitate its leadership. The country would go into turmoil. That is, Iran would go into turmoil. The United States would get control of it, reinstall the Shah, and everything would be hunky-dory for the West. And not only that, from the resource point of view, but it would also severely disrupt this north-south corridor that Russia has been creating, and the east-west corridor that China has been creating, and this would be a big blow to the whole BRICS project as well. So that's what they hoped for. And it looks to me like it's increasingly unlikely that's going to happen. First of all, the consequence for Israel in all this has been that the myth of Israeli superiority has been completely crushed, and thousands and thousands of Israelis are trying to get out of the country, and also the myth of I think the kind of white supremacist attitude that Israelis have is probably, my guess is that it's being humbled. They realize, well, maybe we're not so good as we thought we were. So, but of course, Israel's infrastructure has been severely damaged. So, who's going to pay to fix that? So, one of the major negative consequences has been that Israel as a state itself is severely weakened, and whether it can recover is debatable, because Israel had its own internal conflicts anyway between the far-right nationalist. So there's secular nationalists, like I would say, like Benjamin Netanyahu. There's religious nationalists who go by the idea that the Bible promised Israel from the Nile River to the Euphrates River. So this idea of a greater Israel. They thought that somehow these religious fanatics think that they can get that, and if they think that now, having seen their country essentially blockaded of imports and exports due to their ports being shut down, and massive suffering occurring in the Israeli population, where many of them have to sleep in subways, they're finding out that they're seeing the Gaza that they were cheering on being destroyed. They're seeing that it's come back to them. So this will be a major wake-up call for Israel, and it'll be interesting to see how Israeli society reacts to that. As far as Iran is concerned, this will be difficult, but for them economically, after all, they are being hit with massive missile attacks. But it's a much bigger country, and it can afford to absorb those better. The other thing, the reports that I'm getting is that although Iran has its own issues in terms of secular versus religious and other kinds of political differences, they all understand that their country is under attack, and they're coming together, and they're going to fight, because they know that the ultimate enemy is the West. And there's one other aspect of this, of course, is that Iran, like Russia, there's a very strong pro-Western sentiment in many countries, and particularly has been true in the case of Russia and in the case of Iran. Personally, when I visited Russia, I've met a lot of I have Russian friends, and they think America's just great. I really want to go to America. They have no idea what's going on in America. They have this Disneyland fantasy of what America is. Land of the free, home of the brave, and the streets are paved with gold. It's something like that. Obviously, that's not the way things are going there. But in Iran, it was a kind of similar situation where you had a lot of people who, seriously oppose the theocratic basis of the Iranian government. It is called the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I think there's a fair number of people who are not religious, and they don't really believe in the tenets of Islam to the extent that they want to wear burqas and be so religiously observant. And so you have that kind of faction, which I think is fairly well represented in Iranian society. But at the same time, they realize their country's under attack. They have to pull together. Excuse me. But the other issue is that if the United States really does follow through with this a massive attack, where we're talking about submarines launching Tomahawk missiles and B-2 bombers and B-52 bombers, dropping massive amounts of bombs, which would essentially destroy, as Doug McGregor pointed out, it's not just wiping out Iran's nuclear potential, but essentially wiping out its infrastructure. Very similar. This is what happened in Iraq with the so-called shock and awe campaign, where they destroyed their electrical generation and their water and all the things that a modern society, especially urban society, needs. And if the United States really wipes that out, then that is going to create terrible problems for Iran. But my sense of it is that this could easily be a what we call a Pyrrhic victory, because Iran is so, whether people like it or not, it's so pivotal in the geopolitical configuration of the world, where it is basically, if you look at a map, it's really right at the center between North and South in Asia and East and West, between Europe and the Far East. So as a transportation center, as a key player in the energy markets, it's going to be, whatever happens, the more they create chaos in Iran, it's going to have spillover effects on the West. And so there's a lot of talk about oil prices going up to $100 a barrel or more. So that is a distinct possibility. These people are, they're desperate. I'm talking about the people who control the United States, who are making these decisions. After all, Netanyahu can say, we're losing, please help us. But the reality is that Israel was acting as a cat's paw. The United States has been trying to get control of Iran since 1953, and they were successful then. For 25 years, they lost control, and since 1979, they've been trying to get control of Iran. There's a visceral hatred for Iran, actually for several reasons. One is that they just don't. They have this neurotic obsession with having control, and when a puppet state or a vassal state, wrests itself free from Western control, it just drives the people in Washington and London crazy. They are such control freaks that it freaks them out to lose control. So that's it's a psychological problem, actually, for the people who run the West. But as I say, the economic consequences are going to be, in my opinion, far-reaching, and it's going to be we're really going to be hurting pretty soon. And so the question is, what happens if Israel and the United States lose? because that's really what this all boils down to. The whole BRICS project was about creating a counterpoint to Western hegemony, essentially. And the West has had hegemonic control of the rest of the world for at least 500 years. And if they lose control of it, as they are in the process of doing, the standards of living in the West are going to go down significantly, because we in the West depended on the cheap resources of these other countries that were colonized for literally centuries. And so Europe is heading down the tubes. England, from what I hear, is turning into a third world country, and the United States. I just heard a statistic that I think in like the 1950s and 1960s, the literacy rate of the United States was something like 90 plus percent, but it's now closer to 70%, and half the population has the literacy of a sixth grader. So what you're seeing is a complete degeneration of Western civilization, and that's partly due to the bad decisions that they made, and partly due to the fact that they actually lost control of the resource base, which was propping up their economies, which allowed enough trickle down to allow there to be some degree of social uplift. But you see, what happens is when you have a parasitic organism, and it feeds off of everything that it infects, and if the entities that it feeds off of are able to fight off that parasitic infection, it has to start feeding on itself. And this is exactly what's happening in America and in Europe. So you're going to see increasing poverty and increasing social disruption and dislocation. And I think this is probably inevitable, because even if the United States does score some kind of victory over Iran, the consequences globally are going to be so disruptive that it's going to be bad for everybody. So that's what I see happening, and it's not a pretty picture, but at least I'm just talking reality here, and I'm not the only person who's talking about it. The experts that I listen to, who I consider to be experts, many of them feel the same way. So that's what I want to say, and if you think that what I have to say has enlightened you in any way, then you can head over to one of my stores and buy an information T-shirt, or you can make a contribution to me at my PayPal, or my Buy Me a Coffee, or through Substack. So thanks again very much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.